Hello everyone, my name is Stephanie Boozer and I'm with CUGC HQ, and I am happy to welcome you to today's user share. Very quickly, just a quick note about CUGC. We have over 60 groups around the world, over 17,000 members, and highly encourage you, if you are not already a member or not already familiar, to come on over to mycugc.org and check us out. Find your local group, go to a local meeting, and check out our forums, our blog posts, and all of our upcoming webinars. Lots of stuff out there for you guys. All right, let's get into today. We have our user share today. It's the third part of a series on Windows 10 on XenDesktop. And today I'll be talking about performance monitoring and the latest updates. And presenting that for us will be James Rankin and Kevin Howell. They are both CTAs in the new CTA program with Citrix. And both of them are with HTG. And before I turn things over to them, I want to introduce our moderator. Is Paul Stansel. He's a CTP, and he is a local CUGC leader in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Paul, you want to say hello?
Hey everybody, so I'll be handling your questions today as they come in and passing them over to the presenters.
Awesome. And just a reminder that you do have the question panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. Put your questions in there. And also remind you that this is being recorded, and you will get a link to the recording after the presentation, probably tomorrow. All right. And with that, I will turn things over to James and Kevin. James, I'm sending you the screen right now so you can get us started.
Thank you very much. And let's see if I can successfully share my screen, which is always the trickiest bit. Is that all seem to be showing okay?
Yep, I see it. It's on the, oh, there it is. I see your presentation now.
Excellent. In that case, let us make a start. Excellent. Right. Just before we start, myself and Kevin, obviously you may have noticed we work at the same company, which means we're at the same office, hunched over the same desk, listening to the sounds of the rain coming from outside. So if we sound a little bit echoey because we're in the room together, I can apologise for that, but if it becomes a bit of a problem, please somebody let us know, and we'll see if we can try and switch over to an alternative method halfway through, you know, the kind of challenging thing that you love to do in the middle of live webinars. But as Stephanie said, my name is James Rankin, and today we're doing the third part of our Windows 10 on XenDesktop. And obviously, today we have Kev Howell with me, who generally sort of helps me out on all my discovery and articles and things that we tend to do. So he's now part of the CTA program, which means he's got to come out of the shadows and start doing presentations and stuff himself. Isn't that right, Kev?
It is. Afternoon, everyone. Evening, everyone. So thanks for welcoming us to the CTA program and to this webinar. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, if you struggle to understand my accent, Kevin's is even worse because he's from Newcastle.
Thanks for that.
Anyway, let's just crack on. As I said, this is the third part and hopefully going to be the absolute final part that I'm going to do on Windows 10. Although I did once do a presentation at the Citrix user group in London that said this will be the last word on Windows 10, and then actually it was me and you, Kev. We did one about 6 weeks afterwards talking about some other interesting stuff we've discovered in Windows 10. So it pays to never really say never. Just a quick sort of recap about what I talked about in part 1 and 2. Obviously using a cat picture as the method of passing that across, because as any fool knows, 95% of internet traffic is made up of cat pictures, so you've got to have at least one in every presentation. So for part 1, anybody who may have been on for that, I talked about additions, servicing and migration, which were kind of like the biggest changes that you were likely to notice in Windows 10 as an administrator or an architect or a consultant. Now with part 2, I tried to concentrate really a bit more on some things that kind of, you know, some particular pain points that we'd seen within Windows 10 deployments that we'd done. And mainly those were the universal Windows platform apps, what some people call modern apps or universal apps. apps or metro apps, and actually file type associations. The last part of that. Now, the idea was to kind of almost close the circle, because I don't want to be doing Windows 10 webinars forever, and talk specifically about the things that I hadn't talked about monitoring of Windows 10 and how it actually has performed, obviously, because the two are intrinsically linked. However, big thanks to Microsoft and the very nature of Windows 10, because Windows 10 is sort of an evolving platform, I've actually realized that we need to revisit a few bits that we've got out there. So it isn't just about monitoring and performance, it's also going to be about how some things have changed in the latest iterations of Windows 10 and the bits that you need to know about that. So that's what part 3 is going to be, more like a State of the Union address, I suppose, rather than anything specifically about monitoring and performance. So just quickly, a bit of flagrant self-promotion. I'm sure you've already read all the bump on the my CUGC website advertising this. My name is James Rankin. I am a technical evangelist at HTG here in the rainy northeast of England. I'm a current CTA absence ACA, although I don't know how long the absence program is going to still be around, I'm not sure about, and a VMware expert. And on Twitter, I kind of screwed up a bit when I renamed my Twitter handle, because I forgot how many underscores I put between the James and the Rankin. So I did find out in the end it was 4.
Yeah, and I'm Kevin Howell. I'm the MD here at HTG. Work with James. We worked here quite a lot of times, done quite a lot of work. So yeah, I'm also a CTA, V expert, and we'll run a big blog here. So we've got our blog there where we'll give away quite a lot of free advice and welcome people's input to that as well. So if you've got any questions, feel free to jump on that as well.
Indeed. So that is enough of our flagrant self-promotion. Let's get more or less down to just a quick bit of a loose agenda, really. I think I say that every time I do a presentation. As I say, we'll talk about the monitoring and the importance of monitoring in Windows 10, how we've seen it perform, but then the other bits that we probably need to have a look at, the 2 creators updates that we've had recently, the 2 new versions of Windows 10. There's been some changes to servicing, which was personally disappointing for me, because I spent a long period of time learning all about it and trying to educate other people about it. And there's a lot of security aspects I think now we need to have a look at, and then just a few bits about how the management's changing slightly in Windows 10 and where we think perhaps it might go from there. So anyway, let's talk monitoring first of all, and I think you may agree with me, or possibly not, when I kind of say that monitoring is almost stuck in the dark ages a bit when it comes down to things. That's your street, Kev, isn't it? Down there.
No, it's not quite that bad, so she is. It's not too bad.
It's not really. That's probably Hartlepool or Darlington. I should stop with all the regional UK jokes, because I'm sure none of you have any idea what I'm referring to there. But yeah, monitoring is, I think, very much focused in a way that kind of reflects the IT environments of about 15 years ago. And I kind of, just bringing this screen up here, is that if you look on the left-hand side of this picture here, is we have kind of legacy monitoring. And 15 or 20 years ago, we almost, because we had such kind of static, monolithic IT environments, we concentrated very much on the various infrastructure components, and that's what we find, that you could possibly say that, you know, your application servers were okay, your databases were okay, directory services were okay, network was okay, but the overall user experience wasn't something that we were particularly concerned about. That's the thing. Do you agree with me there?
Yeah. So I think one of the key things there for me, James, is what when we go to these large enterprise deployments is that they tend to buy like SAN. There's a team that looks after a SAN, and they go in their own silo. You have an applications team, there's infrastructure teams, print teams, and all of them have their own metrics that they look at. And as long as that's green, they're doing a good job. But all of them work in silos. Some organisations that don't, but a lot of the time they're all in silos. And unfortunately, you'll see like a director of IT or a CTO come along and go, "Why am I getting a lot of noise from my users saying we've got a poor experience, we've got screen freezes?" And all these tiers are going, well, we're agreeing, we're looking good, but the end user experience is not.
That's the thing. I think users have kind of, over the last 15 years, because everybody now has personal devices And sometimes they're things like iPads and iPhones that have a very kind of slick, reliable, predictable user experience. And now they kind of almost expect that, the delivery of that sort of user experience at work. So this kind of like, we need to have a holistic view of monitoring, really. I mean, this is not specifically about Windows 10. I think this is more about monitoring in general and how we do it in the modern world. I think it's there on the right-hand side, Kevin. We're talking about the end user centric. The end user has to be at the heart of the monitoring that we're doing.
So some of the times, like us, I've been around the IT world quite a lot, but when I started in the early 90s, I remember doing Lanalyzer with Novell ManageWise and them sort of things. And you go into some of these organizations now and they're still using the same metrics for managing these systems, and technology's moved on a hell of a lot, you know. So talking IOPS, SSDs and all that, but procurement buy these systems, they benchmark it on these old metrics, and they do KPIs and service level agreements. And it's just out of date and it doesn't fit what the user's experience today anymore. So
yeah, so if we look at this next slide, we kind of almost tried to take a kind of real-world example of, you know, how we've seen that, you know, monitoring individual points kind of doesn't contribute towards what is the holistic view of that kind of intangible that is user experience. And I think, Kev, this was one of yours that you worked on, wasn't it? There's 3 separate systems that all kind of reported back optimal, as it were.
Yeah, so this is quite common that we see. So it's like banking and finance and government in the UK is that they tend to have 3 or 4 Citrix environments. They tend to have a XenDesktop environment for really old Windows XP. You've got XenApp 5 for apps which can't run on to 64-bit platforms, so you've got that. And then you've got a XenApp 6.5. So this particular customer we had, they were running published desktops on XenApp 6.5, which was a Windows 7 look and feel, and they had key applications running on XenApp 5 and on XenDesktop. Before, what that user did when they came in, when you're talking thousands of users, they would come in and they had to log on. They would power on a thin client, and basically they had 3 logons, and the total logon time there was like 520 seconds before they could do any work. And if they had a screen freeze, they had to wait for that to be reset and come back in. And obviously that's quite a significant amount of time, never mind the amount of experience we had Windows within Windows within Windows. So that caused all sorts of user experience problems, and again, you had separate silo teams looking after these separate environments as well. So trying to keep that user experience at a good level was very difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I think the point is that, you know, the teams that focused on saying that their part of the infrastructure was green, but overall the kind of holistic point of view was that it wasn't a good experience for users, and it's putting all those bits together and having a monitoring system to do that. Now, I think I'm possibly being a bit unfair to Citrix admins and architects and whatnot by saying, because Citrix admins have always been a bit more focused on the client performance, particularly when talking about session host servers or hosts, you know, that have XenDesktop machines on and things like that. And they've always had tech like the old resource manager in XenApp 5 or Edge Site or Director and things like that. But I think even when you're looking at that from that sort of level, I think you still, especially with VDI, need to go a bit deeper, really. I think one example that keeps coming up to me was I had a lot of complaints about user experience on a particular platform, and everything, even from a Citrix monitoring perspective, looked fantastic. It was only when we dug right into what the users were complaining about. They were basically getting a long delay between clicking on the file and the open in Office, and there was a long delay to about 20 seconds before the dialog boxes would come up, and this has happened a lot of times there. And it turned out to be something, if I remember correctly, to do with folder redirection, but it was something that was almost, that particular metric wasn't being baselined in any way. Nobody cared about that aspect of the user experience. So to have a proactive view of that would have been very handy, I think. So when it comes to Windows 10 monitoring, just a quick rundown of what we're going to do. Windows 10 is a kind of an evolving platform, and I think we were talking about this earlier, Kev. It's almost like it's an agile sort of mode of deployment, really. Then I think we can think of kind of Windows 7, Windows XP to Windows 7 was almost like what's the one called? Waterfall. A waterfall method of doing things, in that it was very sort of linear in how it evolved. But now Windows 10, you could potentially have people on Windows Inside, you can have people on 2 or 3 different versions. Each one of these people could have a different cumulative patch update on there and things like that. So it's important to be able to monitor do the baselines on that a lot, because I think a lot of people really fail at taking baselines. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think with Windows 10, obviously, it's ever changing, isn't it? So with this agile model, like I say, when you look at digital transformation programs that we do, it's that you like to have some sort of lead time of what's coming along so you can test this and make sure your applications and that the user experience is going to be good. But obviously, we don't have that lead time, and the code job is quick, isn't it?
Another interesting thing is that I've noted there is the lack of lack of visibility of applications that are in use, and that's almost something that's happened along in the last few years as well. I mean, 15 years ago, generally users just ran the applications that you installed for them, and that's all they could. Now, users sometimes use things like SaaS apps, they use web apps, they can go out and provision Azure infrastructure if they want and run things on there. So understanding the user experience isn't just about understanding the installed apps that you're delivering to them. It's about understanding exactly what they're using and how they're using it, and any of the potential bottlenecks there as well.
Yeah, to understand what their endpoints and interfaces are, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing is, when you try and also the other problem is that often people have kind of historically got an investment in, you know, kind of what you might call a traditional monitoring approach that's infrastructure focused. And if you try and change that, there's often a learning curve attached. They've got to put resource into it. They've got to get the buy-in from the business. And sometimes it's very hard to push that through. But I think it's very important to say that with Windows 10, because it's changed the way that we deploy the platform, I think it's ever much more important to understand properly what's going on in your endpoints, what sort of experience the users are having, and you know how you can make it better for them or respond to problems before they become a big issue. So just a quick rundown of some tech that probably all of you are familiar with that we've used to get bits of monitoring in. Obviously the first one of those there is one we've done quite a lot, is Lakeside SysTrack. Very good product that monitors thousands of metrics on your endpoint. It's also very expensive, very complicated. Extra hop, worth a mention if you need an agentless solution, because it doesn't need an agent to run it, can just read that information from the network. You've got AG Innovations, Little Bear Labs have got monitoring tools. Control Up is probably one that's quite familiar. What did you call it earlier on, Kev?
I said it's all resource manager on steroids. It's probably doing it as disservice, but
it probably is. It
feel.
Looks like it, yes. I think that's why it's popular with Citrix admins, Control Up, in that it kind of almost feels a bit familiar with it. But it is quite popular. It is quite fairly simple to use, I think, compared to some of those. Probably worth a mention is NextThink, which is, you know, again, quite expensive, but I think it does some great monitoring, and also it very much appeals to my inner geek because it does some fantastic visualizations of traffic flow through load balancers and things like that. But I mean, this is not intended as a plug in any way. Recently, we've been doing a lot of work with Incentra, who kind of helped us a bit get past the problem of trying to almost sell people on a new monitoring solution, because Incentra do a managed service of a particular monitoring solution, and they kind of wrap it up. You can put it in the cloud, or you can do it on premises if you want to, but the best thing about it, I think, is you just email the guys out there, because you're paying for this as a managed service, and say, can I have a dashboard that shows X, Y, and Z? And as long as you've got the agents installed, next thing you know, you can go in and look at those statistics, which I think is really good, because it's kind of like, it's a cookie cutter.
Yeah, and also the rapid deployment of that, where it's before, like when you look at the other ones, were like 6 months work and buying infrastructure, getting change control. That from the cloud would just rapidly deploy it, and then you have the service management wrap around it, which was really good. So yeah, it's a turnkey solution, isn't it?
It is, and as I say, we found it pretty handy, especially where people have kind of said, well, we think we only need the monitoring for the implementation phase of the project till we get everything ironed out, which I probably disagree with, but if that's what they want to do. Whereas with that, you don't have to pay for 3 years worth of support, you don't have to buy the product, you just say, I'll have 6 months worth, please, of X, Y, and Z metrics. Anyway, so from a monitoring perspective, that's one that we found we've had quite a lot of joy with. So we've got across the importance, I hope we have anyway, that you need to monitor Windows 10, I think a lot more closely than you previously did, because, as I say, it has moved the goalposts slightly with regard to how it behaves. But now, if we talk about, obviously, monitoring later on performance, does Windows 10 perform like a kind of all singing, all dancing fireworks sort of fantastic operating system, or is it more a bit buggy, a bit crashy, a bit unstable, and prone to break things rather drastically? So I thought we'd just share some of the statistics that we gathered from the sort of 3 or 4 Windows deployments that we've done so far. So some interesting bits to pick out here. The first one is that Windows 10, you probably might be aware, does quite a rapid boot. It hasn't finished initializing all of its services and whatnot when you actually see the logon screen. So the thing that we found is that if we saw a lot of machines do a boot from cold, you would then get an appreciative sort of drag on logon time and the performance just after the logon as well. We noticed that quite quickly when we did that RTM deployment of Windows 10. And CPU and memory usage overall extrapolated through that wasn't drastically increased by about 3% and 4%. But the biggest thing we did notice was a large increase in disk reads and disk writes, which across the entire set of statistics that we've got available was about 80%, which is quite a sizable jump. But I think we were talking about this earlier on, and what we're about to the fact that it runs much better with fast storage, and that's a fact with Windows 10.
Yeah, well, a lot of the Windows 10 deployments we're seeing now, the replacing hardware, a lot of the new hardware comes with SSDs on there now from the thick client.
I think
so
from a VDI perspective as well, I think everybody's hopefully got around to the fact that fast storage does make things absolutely better. But I think when we did have some places where they didn't have traditional fast storage and we replaced it, we saw a huge decrease in performance-related issues, which obviously you'd expect. There is a kind of story doing the rounds, which is possibly apocryphal, saying that Microsoft did most of the development for Windows 8 and Windows 10 on some big customers from the US who had been fully SSD for years. Judging by the way that it appears to be optimized for SSDs and fast storage, I would possibly agree with that. There was also, we did see an increase in network activity by quite a sizable amount compared to what we were comparing it against on Windows 7. It's possible, we believe, that this might be down to update processes that often run outside of the traditional ones, such as with UWP apps, and obviously there's the spectre of telemetry and whatnot, which we will discuss there. But one of the bits that I probably thought Microsoft wouldn't want us to be talking about is, if you extrapolated it out, we had an 8% increase on Windows 10 in blue screens, which are actually a nice smiley blue screen now instead of the traditional one. But I think this is possibly skewed by an early deployment we did where we had a huge increase in blue screens. It was about 145% or something like that. So until we rectified the issue. So I think including that sort of opening phase in those statistics has skewed it rather nastily towards that. But I think what we did notice, particularly from a performance perspective, and certainly from calls we got to help desks and whatnot, is that the first logon time is the single most reported bottleneck for users. And if you're in a non-persistent environment, this really becomes a bit of a problem. It's mainly where it's creating the user profile for that first logon. Now, if you're in a physical environment where the user logs on and then they've got a local profile there forever in case the machine breaks, then fair enough. But in a VDI environment, if you're doing non-persistent, this can quickly become a big bottleneck.
Quite large as well. It was 120, 130.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, it's interesting to know. Yeah, on Windows 7, the profile is under 5 mega, a default profile. On Windows 8, it went up to about 60, and it's 120, 125. I've seen it's hit 200. I'm not sure what on earth makes it be so variable, but yeah, it's a huge local profile compared to well, Windows NT4, where it was about 168 kilobytes or something like that. So I think we need to get back to that. Only joy. Well, the in-session performance we did actually find was better, didn't we? Yeah, it was a lot better. The application launch times, bear in mind that the same set of apps was about 9% quicker through all of the stuff. So what are the sort of things we can do with regard to monitoring? If I can actually click on the screen instead of doing it outside of it. So yeah, the biggest one that we keep coming back to this, and I probably spent a lot of the part 2 of this XenDesktop series talking about, is get rid of as many of those universal Windows platform apps as you can. It's those that create the big drag on that first logon, and to be honest, cause a lot of other issues performance-wise as well. They actually update outside of it, and as I was just seeing earlier on, Kev, there's Daniel Feller at Citrix. He's got an article that he updates telling you which universal Windows platform apps can be removed for each one. I mean, there's all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff in there. What you can do as well is, if you go into audit mode and build a custom default profile, that is another good thing to do, because you get a lot of the sort of, the first logon stuff out of the way when you create that within the custom default profile. It's a bit of a chew on, but it's worth doing. Another thing you can, when you log on to Windows 10 for the first time, it creates your start tiles layout with lots of live tiles and wonderful, useful enterprise apps like Candy Crush and World of Tanks and what was the new one I saw in the latest version of
Minecraft, not the one that
Minecraft, is there? So there's a new one. What was it called again? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Fallout Shelter or something like that. I don't know. Really, really unuseful. So if you create a custom XML file, which I've written a couple of articles on, you can just spit out the tiles that you want to have on there instead of having all this stuff that it probably pulls from the internet anyway. I would have thought at least some of it. Now, pre-booting machines, probably people have been doing this for a long time, VDI-wise, but that's a good way to get a better performance by making sure people aren't booting up from cold. And obviously, what we did notice is with a lot of services and a lot of scheduled tasks and telemetry sort of traffic going on, if you can disable all of that stuff, then the more the better, which we'll talk about just in a second. But profile management solution also makes a big difference as well, I think. That's if you get something in like User Profile Manager, if it's tuned right. You can use User Profile Disks on Windows 10 now if you're feeling really daring. Fancy a lot of
good luck with
that. Yeah, it's not multi-session, so probably not ideal. Although, you know, you could try if you didn't want to pay with it. FS Logics, which is probably a bit of a plug, to be fair, because we do a lot of FS Logics.
Good product, which is what it says on the tin.
It does, yeah, and you know, the guys from FS Logics said I mean, we've had about sort of 20-second long times, but they reckon they can pull it down even further.
Sub 10, they reckon, don't they?
Yeah, in certain situations. So again, something that's useful to almost sort of support your videos. Well, the thing that I've always found is the VMware Operating System Optimization Tool is an excellent product to get out there, simply because you can take it and you can download templates that people have created, and it does a lot of the disabling of services and telemetry and things like that for you. It's a very useful tool, I think, and it's community driven as well. It's definitely useful. Always test first though, unless you're like me and decide to import the high performance version straight into some machines for testing. It can do things like get rid of your lock screen images and things like that, which you may not want to do. So obviously test it all first, but it's a great tool. And I know Citrix have got an optimizer tool as well, haven't they? Did I say there was some stuff on Slack the other day about an optimizer?
Yeah. I was going to mention that you guys didn't have it on your slide. Citrix has.
Yes, I just remembered it when who was it sent it? Was it Martin sent it out the other day? I probably got a note somewhere saying, but yes, thank you, Paul. There is the Citrix optimizer tool out there as well, which I've been meaning to test, but unfortunately I've had some major disasters to deal with the last couple of days related to XenApp 5, so it's probably their own fault. So yeah, those are the sort of tips that we found around Windows 10 performance that can, you know, make the difference. I mean, I think the way we were discussing earlier on was that when it comes to scalability, you often go down a route of either going for density or for user experience. Yeah. And we found that if you go for density, you know, if you try and cut it down and see how many systems you can get on particular hardware, Windows 7 won hands down. But the interesting thing was, if you then went for user experience, it was almost completely level pegging between the two. And I think, I'm not sure about this, I think that's possibly because Windows 7 uses the Aero Glass when you go for the user experience, which isn't there in Windows 10 in that same sort of format. So it was quite surprising if you went for user experience, which obviously we've bigged up, so we always go for user experience as a primary driver. We can basically, you know, get the same level of performance out of Windows 10 on the same spec virtual machines as we did with Windows 7. So it was quite pleasing performance results, all things considered. So, digressing away from performance and monitoring slightly, we have had the 2 creators updates recently. Kev, you just put the creators updates.
It went through very well, but I am using a Surface Book, so it's Microsoft hardware. So I would expect that to go quite well, but no, I put it through, no problems at all.
That was an in-place upgrade.
It was an in-place upgrade, yeah. But
I think Microsoft are getting better at in-place upgrades.
Yeah, the first few had lots of problems with graphics drivers when you're applying to a Surface dock and that sort of thing. We had lots of problems with that. Same with Dell hardware, anywhere like NVIDIA graphics cards had lots of problems early days, but this seemed to be settling down and it seems to be behaving itself quite well.
It's going to blue screen anymore.
No.
So yes, we've had two creators updates. We've had the creators update in March, and we've had the fall creators update, which was literally about 2 days ago, wasn't it? It landed on us. Just a quick mention of anything that might be interesting in here. I know you were saying, Kev, OneDrive files on demand is a good one for you.
Yeah. So we use Office 365 quite a bit, and downloading the full OneDrive for business and SharePoint and stuff like that. We've got a lot of problems with corruption, and somebody's uploaded a file that hasn't synced down, you've got to delete it, redo it. It's a pain. But with this now, it's great. It's just on demand. Your files are there locally. It's just got pointers there, and it pulls them down, up and down when you need them. And it just seems to work with treatment. I think it's a long coming, that. So yeah, welcome addition, that.
And we have the Linux subsystem is now fully functional as well.
Yeah.
I've got a spelling mistake on my slide there. I've just noticed it. I can't believe it.
The
Linux, yes. You don't realise what a grammar Nazi I am. That I might have to go and flagellate myself. For anybody who's not familiar with that, flagellate means to mutilate yourself in a religious punishment way. It doesn't sound as horrible as it seems to. Yes. So anyway, Linux.
Linux that's a good addition, because a lot of people everywhere we go, they've got Apple Macs, and they're using them for dev because they're doing all the HTML5 apps, Linux-based apps, and like getting away from old mainframe systems. So from that point of view, I don't think we've got the justification to buy a Mac anymore. So we can get a Windows 10 device and they've got that Linux subsystem. I know you can run it in a VM, but it's native now, so I think that's a big thing for a lot of developers.
Yeah. From an admin sort of perspective, they got rid of Paint, which I was devastated about, because I thought, how am I going to do my screenshots? But I've discovered the wonders of the snipping tool, which has only been around for about 10 years. So I'm okay with that now. 3D Paint Suppressor. We've got an address bar in Registry Editor. We can now see which service host is controlling which specific service in Task Manager. We can track GPU activity. They've got this new thing called Fluent Design, which is apparently the start of some sort of interface overhaul, which is probably not good news. Something to do with what used to be called Project Neon. You now pin contacts to the taskbar, which just before this we were trying to do it, but we've discovered a bit of a bug. So I think people pinning might be something that needs a little bit of work, because we couldn't get it to work. And now you've got things like mixed reality as well. So if you want to superimpose a picture over your cup of tea or something like that, you could do that. But possibly outside of the OneDrive files on demand and a couple of admin things, not an awful lot of new sort of features for enterprise build. But what you have to remember is that when you get a Windows 10 feature update, there's not just things that are installed new, things are taken away. Now, one of the interesting ones here, the first on there, tile data layer, which was a kind of a database that used to control your start menu tiles, has now been moved, and because I've only had 2 days to look at it, I haven't tracked it down yet, but I think it's gone inside one of the Universal Windows Platform Apps folders, which could be very interesting in non-persistent environments if you want to roam that around. So there's somewhat there. There's also SMB version 1 is now removed from new installs. If you're wondering why there's a Super Mario Brothers picture on there, because I typed in SMB1 to Google Images, and that's what I got, and I thought it was amusing enough to generate to be used as the image. But yeah, the SMB version 1 protocol, which is highly insecure, is now removed from new installs. However, if you do an upgrade and it's there, it will still be there. So that says something about the security of a lot of applications out there.
There's a lot of applications still using it, unfortunately, as well, especially some organisations we know.
Exactly, yeah. EMET, the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, has now been absorbed into Windows Defender, the suite of Windows Defender, which is expanding a bit. Flash Auto runs disabled edge, interactive services detection is gone. Microsoft Paint is now only in the Windows Store, along with 3D Builder. Now, the only reason I noticed 3D Builder every time, it was always the first app on my start menu whenever I clicked on it on Windows 10. So now it's gone, I noticed straight away. Windows PowerShell 2, I believe, is ready to, you should migrate all of your stuff to PowerShell 5. I did say something from Jeffrey Snover on Twitter that says soon PowerShell.exe will be PWSH. .exe instead, which will probably annoy me quite a lot. And if you can believe it, Outlook Express support has finally been removed from the code base. Kev, can you remember anyone using Outlook Express?
I do, unfortunately. I remember using it myself, but I think it was in the 90s when the old POP3 and dial-up email and stuff. And yeah, glad these things have moved on.
Yes, but apparently it's only just been removed from the Windows code base. So there you go. But anyway, talking of Citrix compatibility to current Windows 10, so 1709 literally has just come out of the door, so as you expect, it's not yet officially supported for doing VDA installs on Citrix. Mid-November, I believe, they will have some fixes from that for 1709. 1703 and 1607 fully supported, 1511 and the RTM version are not supported unless you're on LTSP. Now, this leads me on to what I want to talk about servicing, because as you can see there, Citrix have got semi-annual channel and semi-annual channel targeted rather than CBB and LTSB. But as I said, we're going to have to go back and do another bit of conversation about servicing, because this is what we originally had given to us as the servicing related terminology. You had your different update categories, you had feature upgrades, which were full copies of the operating system, servicing updates, which were hot fixes and patches, and definitions, which were definition updates for things like Windows Defender. You could update it in several different ways. You could have a direct connection to Windows Update. You could have Windows Update for Business, which was like WSUS Lite. You could do a bit of peering and a bit of splitting up into different rings. You could have full-on WSUS or SCCM. You'd even combine the two together if you wanted to do, you know, proper peering, keep all the updates on your own systems, have granular control. Could use a third-party tool. And then we had 4 branches. We had Windows Insider for people who wanted to get advanced versions or you know, upcoming changes. Current branch, which was almost like a pilot branch. Current branch for Business, which was intended to be the stable branch, and long-term servicing branch, which was supported for up to 10 years and intended for, you know, kind of stuff that really, you know, couldn't stand that sort of fast update cadence. I spent about a year and a half going around doing presentations on stuff that included all of this different terminology and how it related, and then Microsoft went and changed it all. So now feature upgrades have become feature updates. I don't know why they did that, just maybe to disguise the fact that they're actually a full operating system upgrade. Windows Update is now known as Windows Update with Unified Update Platform, which apparently is supposed to make it faster. And for your update branches, the CB and the CBB, now if you read Citrix's literature, have been divided up into semi-annual channel pilot or targeted, and then semi-annual channel broad. But I did get a tweet from somebody literally a couple of days ago that said, actually, that's completely changed now. So now we have update channels, they're all known as channels, but those 2 differentiations for semi-annual channel have basically gone, and it's all lumped as semi-annual channel. Now the idea is, before it used to be Microsoft would declare something ready for broad deployment, it would enter semi-annual channel broad, but now they have said it is up to the business or the enterprise themselves to decide when to move, you know, from semi-annual channel into broad deployment. So there is now nothing there that says there is this 3-month period where it exists in pilot or, you know, what used to be CB. It is all just semi-annual channel, and you decide when to go with the next category of deployment. Excuse me. So the servicing window that we have is now fixed at 18 months. So down at the bottom there, which September 2017, which is actually October 2017, you may have noticed when that release came out. Enters semi-annual channel. I have left pilot in there, but forget about that bit. That just means it is semi-annual channel there. And then it is 18 months later, it will no longer be supported. So in March of 2019, this release will no longer be supported. The grace period of 60 days that you previously had has been removed. There still is a delay upgrades GPO. I don't know whether that'll still work or it'll still provide the extra 35 days deferral that it could, but the servicing window is now fixed completely at 18 months. So again, some idiot did this as an image instead of turning it there. So this still mentions the yellow and the green for pilot and broad. If you just consider those as the semi-annual channel in its entirety, we can now see you won't have any more than 3 versions at one time. You've still got an 18-month cycle to do your testing and upgrade. You don't have to go to every new release. You know, you can wait the 18 months. If you want new features, obviously you'll have to. And the long-term servicing channel sits outside this. What are your thoughts on that, Kev, that we've now got no more than 3 versions at one time?
I think it simplifies it for the business. I think basically a lot of businesses don't have the appetite to like take the amount of change that Microsoft are offering, and I think we're getting a little bit of grief about that, if I was honest, especially some of the bigger organisations, because the timelines where they've got like applications to test, the secure organizations. This just doesn't fit with that release cadence. So now they've done that, I think they've listened to businesses now and probably took that on board.
It's more or less a case of almost as you were before,
Yeah,
just that we now have this specific 18-month kind of deadline and committed to 2 new feature releases every year. I think that's the main difference. I do think it's better. I just kind of, there was so much confusion in between. I think this is possibly Microsoft's response to it to try and nail it down. But interestingly, we've just had the 1709 release. It wasn't actually released until October.
It'd be interesting how it goes over there. Consider this sort of Windows XP out there. They've been trying to get people off that for years.
Well, so exactly, yeah. But as I say, it's
best intentions, huh?
Yeah, I think what we were discussing earlier on is that we've got to get people away from this sort of fear of change that some users have as well, haven't we? To try and encourage them to adopt a more, like they do on their mobile phones, for instance.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's what's changed in the channel version. So, just a quick recap. Probably this applies to what we talked about in the first part of this, but if you want to deal with servicing channels, you need to change your mindset. Testing and operations need to work a lot closer together. I penned the sort of moniker test ops for that. Probably won't catch on. Windows Insider is really vital. Lets you stay ahead of the curve, learn what's coming down the pipeline. Virtualizing your apps and your user settings really helps, because if a feature upgrade fails and you've got to roll back, then you can just drop all the apps and the user settings back in. You should always use WSS or SCCM or something like that in an enterprise situation. You've got to verify all your policies and configs afterwards. And as I said earlier, be aware that features aren't just added, sometimes they get removed. So by the time you figure out the paper pen in Kev, it'll probably get yanked. So you won't be able to use it anymore.
Yeah, well, so be it.
So there are also some changes around security. So Windows telemetry has become a bit of a bigger fish recently, because when they gave it away, there's this preconception that Microsoft are basically just stealing all of your data, and how you respond to this depends on how much of a tinfoil hat you wear, essentially. But I suppose the tinfoil hat brigade are a bit justified because of what's been happening over the last sort of 18 months or so, particularly in Europe. And what you need to do with Windows 10 is kind of try and neuter it as much as possible if you can. So what we got from Microsoft, when people implied that they were stealing all your data like Google was, we were given a GPO that said you can disable telemetry. And as you can see, if you set it to 0, which is available to enterprise only, it's supposed to not send any telemetry data to Microsoft. Do you believe them, Kev? Of course you believe them. Well, it turns out that some guy broke out Wireshark and basically said that, even if you've got this group policy enabled, you're still sending all of our data back to Redmond. And Microsoft said, oh, yeah, that's for a reason. You better leave it alone. Now, I don't know how many people out there are within the EU, but we have a thing coming up called EU GDPR. And this is a radical overhaul of the existing data protection laws, and it basically means that companies have got to be very specific and very, in line with a lot of different guidelines about how they deal with people's personal data. And I think it's very much worth mentioning this in regard to Windows 10's telemetry. So a quick run through of GDPR terms here. A data controller is an enterprise that collects personal data. You have to specify why you're collecting it. That has to be legitimate, and you have to be very explicit about it. Also explicit about how long you're going to keep it for, and whether, if people ask you to delete it, how you're going to handle that. There's also a data processor, which is an organization that processes data on behalf of the data controller, like a cloud service, document management provider. And then there's the data subject, who's the person who that data relates to. Now, what a lot of people tend to think is if they're not in the EU, this doesn't apply to them, but that is wrong. Anybody across the world who processes the data of EU citizens in any way, shape or form is bound by GDPR. And that's the thing. I mean, even with Brexit, it's going to be written into British law, so that again wouldn't get there anywhere in Britain, away from their sort of, their obligations under GDPR. Now, this is very interesting because Microsoft have kind of said, come and join us in our data collection, because we've got a thing called upgrade readiness, which basically, if you go out there, configure the telemetry, join us URAD and install OMS, you can then use this data that they've collected. And that sounds like a good idea on the surface.
Yeah. Takes the legwork out of it.
Exactly. But I think the thing is, almost the tinfoil hat is a bit justified, because it's not really clear where the implications are. Now, you've got to remember that if it's found that Microsoft were using your data in an incorrect manner and you had handed your data off to them because you're running Windows 10, it's not just the data processor that's on the hook, it's the controller as well. And so both of them would become liable for prosecution under the GDPR. I don't know if that's criminal offence, whether prosecution is the right term, but yeah, there would definitely be an offence that. And if you think I'm being completely paranoid about it, then, well, just recently the Dutch regulator have said that Windows 10's behaviour in its default pattern actually breaches their data protection laws, which are not even the GDPR laws yet. So I think really you kind of need to almost do as much sort of, if you're bound by GDPR, I'm aware there may be people out there who work for US corporations who don't do anything to do with Europe, so that will be good from their point of view. But if you do process the data of any EU citizens, then you probably need to have a good hard think on, maybe even a word with your lawyers about Windows 10. Because one thing that GDPR has that ICO didn't, DP, I've completely lost my train of thought. Whatever the old data protection laws were called, has is teeth. It has big teeth. And as an example here, sorry, not as an example, this is the penalty breakdown. So you can have, for particular offences, 2% of your annual turnover. So not your profits or anything like that, your turnover, or 10 million euros. Or for other offences, 4% of annual turnover, or 20 million euros. And not surprisingly, it is whichever one of those is higher. So there is the potential for some quite heavy.
Quite a chunk of change, right? Isn't it?
It is a chunk of change.
Well, I think there's custodial sentences that have been talked about as well.
Oh God, that'll be glorious.
Yeah.
As an example, TalkTalk were a British ISP who had a well-publicised data breach, and they were fined, I believe, the maximum of £400,000 under the current data protection laws. If that had happened under GDPR and they'd been hit with a maximum fine, they would have been fined £73 million. So the point I'm trying to make is
significant, isn't it?
It is significant, and I mean, from a risk perspective, I really think that until somebody either offers some clarification around this, or there is a test case of some sort, or Microsoft speak to the ICO here in England or whoever it is here in Europe, we really need to try and cut down the telemetry, because at the end of the day, even I don't know whether you'd be able to say, that Microsoft is responsible because they kind of own the operating system. It's such a legal, it's a legal minefield. Yeah. So, I mean, by all means configure those JPOs, even though I've just said they probably don't work, but I get the impression that if they have to make them work, then they'll use the same JPOs. Identify the telemetry-related services in Windows 10. There's one example there. Connected user experiences telemetry. There are others. There are also scheduled tasks, that can, that do things to do with data collection. I was quite interested. I was reading some of Edward Snowden's documents the other day, and apparently the NSA used to use Windows error reporting traffic to identify specific Windows targets across the internet. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. There are a number of telemetry-related domains, such as this fantastic one called vortexwin.data.microsoft.com. You could block them at the firewall or with a hosts file. However, you'd have to be careful not to break things like Office 365 as well. And also, as we said before, monitoring is very important. And monitoring, if you've got a good monitoring tool, you can perform checks on data egress from devices and things like that to make sure that the telemetry isn't doing, too much out there. So that's enough about security and all the threats of multi-million half-hours. So I just sort of finish off by talking about a few sort of miscellaneous things you may have noticed within Windows 10. One thing is settings versus the control panel. So we're very much in a hybrid stage now where settings is replacing the control panel. As an admin, Kev, do you find it easier, harder to use, or is it just...
It's much of a muchness, you know what I mean? Plenty of skin that cat, as would say, but yeah.
It is, as I say, it's for an admin, it is a bit annoying. Sometimes when you dig deep down, you find yourself going back to control panel. But I suppose if Microsoft have decided that that is, you've got to be careful when you're disabling, obviously, UWP apps, that things like the settings app aren't the ones you disable, because you could potentially end up in a very much world of hurt there. Well, yeah, I think we're going to find out eventually, apart from maybe things like Java and Flash that kind of inject their own applets into control panel, we will find that the settings app comes in. So it's very much a case of get used to it as much as you can. And there is, down this route a bit, we were talking about this earlier on as well, was that Intune and group policy are almost kind of, the official word for Microsoft is that group policy is very much alive, but it's only been used on domain computers. And I think it's very interesting to notice that the Intune CSPs always seem to come up before the GPOs.
Yeah, seems to get a lot more attention, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's the way that Microsoft kind of want to make people go. Now, I think this is probably a good thing, because, again, we were discussing earlier, we think that possibly the domain, such as it is, has kind of really almost had its day, really, hasn't it? It's become less of, you know, this kind of monolithic kind of, you know, like a castle sort of thing, ring fenced for your devices and your management, and now it's more of an authentication system. I mean, if you look at Azure AD, it's very much different from traditional AD.
Yeah. You know, you look at Office 365 as well, where that's all interconnected, and you've got all that federation. It's seems to follow that sort of model, doesn't it? It's a connected world.
It is, yeah, and I think this is where Microsoft have kind of postulated that people will be, and that the Intune model is a better way of managing it. I mean, I think it is, right, because now, you know, you kind of, you take a device and you hit a portal of some sort, and you then kind of subscribe using your Azure AD credentials to that. So the fact that the domain is changing, I think, means that the days of group policy for managing things will possibly be numbered. And just another quick complete and utter aside, we obviously have Windows 10S, which has come out in the last few months as well, and it's particularly interesting to Citrix-y sort of people, because if Microsoft are looking towards things like the Chromebook kind of market, then Citrix becomes very much sort of front and centre, doesn't it? Because that's how you would still get your legacy apps. So,
well, we're seeing a lot of schools now, well, education sectors, like replacing thin clients with Chromebooks, causing the cost of them, and the kids and students are getting laptops, and you can provide a Windows experience on there and the applications. It's a win-win situation at low cost, isn't it? So
yeah, and would definitely appeal to Microsoft with a free Minecraft education subscription. Although, and obviously you can turn them into Windows 10 Pro for a free. But it's interesting that I'm not sure if I mean, I can see a lot of people maybe going down that route and just provisioning the legacy apps through that.
Yeah.
But again, would you use Windows 10S or would you use a Chromebook? I don't know. It's an interesting one to throw out there. And obviously the final one is, and this is another weird slide, I think Microsoft's end game, really, Windows 10 kind of makes it a lot easier for you to, you know, kind of, because the management plane is sort of stripped away from you a bit, and it's a lot more online, it's a lot more to do with federated services, so it kind of makes Azure more palatable to everyone, do you think?
Yeah, well, obviously it goes hand in glove with all of the services like Office 365, the SharePoint services online, so Windows 10 gives you the ultimate user experience for that. Like, we've tried Macs, using Macs, great bit of kit, but using it with 365 and SharePoint, really difficult for editing documents and stuff like that, so yeah.
Also, we've got Citrix Cloud now as well, in Azure or wherever you choose to put it. So that's another part of Windows 10 that I think, you know, the whole direction of Windows 10. It's interesting that Satya Nadella always tends to say he's very much a cloud person rather than Windows person. I mean, apparently Windows only accounts for like 9% of Microsoft's division, and it's Azure, which is growing, you know, day by day. So that's the interesting part about it, that really we're almost being steered down towards that, and it's possible that Citrix Cloud, with its management plane, you know, done by Citrix and updated by Citrix, is you know, part of that same steer. So I think I have no idea what time it is. Oh no, I've got a summary slide. I want my summary slide. You should always have a summary slide. Yeah. So the key things that I really think, you know, you need to have this. Security is very much still a big issue, and now with GDPR, it is a bigger concern with Windows 10. I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered there, and that's why I've said your telemetry options need to be assessed, possibly by legal people, and defined within these regulatory requirements. As we try to put across, monitoring the environment holistically is key to maintaining good user experience, and very important on Windows 10, because, as I say, it's almost a moving target of an operating system. All those performance tweaks, if you want to get best performance on VMs, in VDI VMs in Windows 10, get all those performance tweaks in. There's some great articles out there that recommend, best practice, things like that. The VMware OSOT and the Citrix Optimizer help take some of the sting out of that. Your servicing branches have now been improved, so you do get the discretion yourself to decide when your pilot ends and broad deployment starts. So there's no more of this 3 months waiting for Microsoft to declare it and then rushing around. There's a bit more leeway there. I've always said that virtualizing stuff is key to dealing with these rapid updates because it abstracts everything away from the underlying operating system. And sadly, universal Windows platform apps are continually an annoyance and really offer nothing to XenDesktop environments.
No.
That I can see.
Isn't it?
Even the Citrix Receiver UWP app I find annoying because it doesn't display any of the customization of the stuff. So I think UWP really is a bit of a dead duck. And
You do need an Xbox on your XenDesktop enterprise.
I think they might have got rid of the Xbox services now, finally, in this release, although I haven't checked that. Still, and as we said before, it's all about the cloud now, and I think everything is designed to steer towards cloud as the end game, at least from Microsoft, from what I can tell. So, hopefully, almost on time, but if anybody's got any questions or anything they want to pitch in, is there anything out there?
So it's been pretty quiet, but we just got one. Is Microsoft Direct Access a competitor for Citrix? We implemented it and our Citrix license has dropped.
Direct Access is a bit of a funny one because it depends how you're using it. It was never really intended as a kind of a VPN sort of solution, was it? Direct Access. I know I've got it on my laptop and it's nothing but an annoyance for me. But I've never heard anything about Direct Access being a competitor for Citrix. I mean, it was a more a remote access sort of thing originally, so it might possibly cut across some of the NetScaler sort of product line or things like that, but not when it comes to XenDesktop or XenApp, I wouldn't have thought.
Okay. And have you heard of any GPO issues applying Windows folder redirection for Windows 10?
I haven't heard specifically of any issues, but I do know that folder redirection is almost something that I think Microsoft are kind of a bit keen to deprecate, really. Yeah. It's almost leaning more towards the whole use of things like OneDrive for Business, where you have a local sync folder that then, instead of redirecting out across the network, because the idea is, folder redirection, if it's not configured correctly, as well as giving you odd app issues, can really, in a mobile situation, be a complete drag. I've seen people who complain a lot about, they've got folder redirection set up and, their VPN in, but the links are slow and things like that. And I think that the end game is to have these sort of selective file syncs, such as OneDrive for Business and ShareFile and
centralized in the cloud solution.
Yeah, that's it. And you want to have the ability to pull them down like that. But yeah, as I say, I haven't seen any specific problems with Windows 10 and folder redirection. As far as I know, it still works. The only thing is, I'd be a bit concerned about how much actual active development Microsoft is leaning towards with that. It's the same thing with, I've completely forgotten my train of thought now. What did somebody tell me was going on? Yeah, roaming profiles. Microsoft are very keen to kind of give this kind of message that roaming is dead, and that's not how they're going to do it anymore. And I think folder redirection possibly sits almost in that legacy camp with things like roaming profiles when it comes to how they're concerned. So with that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if there's possibly some
still
issues.
They'll probably just drop support to take the whole PST connecting that Outlook sort of thing, isn't it? So yeah.
That's all we've got in the chat window.
Cool.
Okay, I'll grab the screen back really quickly. Thank you guys. That was a great presentation. That was definitely very interesting. Can you see my screen now, by the way?
Yep, we can, yeah.
Yep. Awesome. All right, thanks everybody. Like I said, that was a great run through. That was amazing. I love that you guys did 3 series. I really appreciate it. So very quickly for all of you guys, there is a link in the chat window to a survey. It's very short and anonymous. We love to get your feedback and comments. It helps us, plan future webinars and everything else for CUGC. And I also threw in the chat window a link to the forum thread for this webinar. So if later on you have more questions, or after you watch the recording and you have another question, you can type those in there and I will get them to James and Kevin and get some answers for you. And finally, just a reminder to follow us on Twitter at mycugc. And with that, I will give you guys back the rest of your day. Thanks, James. Thanks, Kevin. Great show. And thank you, Paul, for keeping an eye on those questions for us.
Not a problem.
All right, guys. Everyone.